Welcome back to Speak Out with Christine Jurgen. I'm your host. We've had a little bit of time off, but we are back coming in hot. We've got a lot of great episodes coming out for you guys. Today's episode is no exception, and it completely challenged me and convicted me in multiple ways. And I'm excited for you guys to hear from our guest today. Our guest is Benjamin Watson, former NFL player of 16 years. Now he works for Human Coalition and has been a voice for the voiceless for a very long time. And we respect him and love him for that. And we talk about a lot today. We're talking about this being a right versus left issue and how we have to come together at some point in time to be able to actually accomplish anything. We talk about what it's like to be pro-life in the NFL. We're talking about how we can help people. What is the new movement going to look like now that we are a year past Roe v. Wade almost? He has written a book on this subject matter, and I'm looking forward to sharing it with you guys when it does come out. It will be out on June 20th. It is called The New Fight for Life: Roe, Race, and a Pro-Life Commitment to Justice. So I would love for you guys to grab it when it's out. I will remind you about it. I will put a link to the pre-order in the caption below. I'm so bad at this, like below, click link, subscribe. But I'll make sure you guys have a link that you can go ahead and order it. I think you're really going to enjoy listening to Benjamin Watson today. Hopefully he will challenge you and convict you in ways you haven't been before, because this is a very political topic today. We know it's not political, it's a human rights issue, but based on today's climate, it becomes very political. So it's a great perspective. He's also produced the movie Divided Hearts of America, which was phenomenal. You should watch it if you haven't. It's very eye-opening, and I really, really enjoyed it. I watched it with my son, and I think that all of you will enjoy that. So check out all the stuff that he's done. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. Benjamin Watson, thank you so much for joining us today. You were in the NFL for 16 years, right?
Right. Yes.
Tell me a little bit.
Long years.
Tell me a little bit about that. What position did you play? Teams? Were you always passionate about football? Is that something you knew you wanted to do from a young age?
Yeah, Christina. First of all, thanks for having me. I 16 years in the NFL. Can't believe it's over. It's like a lifetime ago, and I've been retired for 3 years. But I played on 4 different teams, played in New England, New Orleans, Cleveland, and Baltimore, played tight end. And so we're kind of the in-betweeners. Like, we're the guys who aren't quite big enough to be offensive linemen. We aren't quite small enough to be wide receivers. And so we get down, we do some blocking, catch the ball, but always loved football. Grew up loving the game. My father played the game at University of Maryland. And so I remember being a little kid and just always loving the game of football.
Yeah, my son plays, so he's actually really excited that I get to have you on as a guest. Yeah, he's playing running back and has played since he was in 2nd grade. He's in 9th grade now.
Okay.
But that brings up a question for me, because he loves football. Will you let your children play? Because I know there's a lot of football players who are like, no, it's too intense. It's too dangerous on the body. Would you let your kids play?
Yeah, that is a good one, and one that my wife and I have considered. We have 7 kids, and the third one is a boy. He's 11 years old, and he loves football. I mean, flag football. He's always talking about it. We've decided not to let him play contact until he gets to later in middle school, possibly. I don't feel like I would prohibit him from playing. Although it would be perfectly fine with me if he plays baseball, basketball, or doesn't play sports, period. I mean,
Totally.
Honestly, there's so many other things you can do.
Yeah.
I don't want him to play, and you probably understand this with your kids too. It's like, I don't want them to play because daddy played or because I want to make daddy happy. I'm happy with you regardless. I'm proud of you regardless. You don't have to play. But if he wants to play, I'll let him play. I'll just cringe. I mean, it is a dangerous sport. It's 100% injury sport. That's the thing about football. It's 100% injury sport. And so you're going to have an injury. But I'm trying to delay that as much as possible with him.
Totally. I hear you. And I can completely relate, because it's one of those things where when they were younger, he did play tackle, but it wasn't as bad. They're like little waddling penguins out there almost.
Exactly.
Like, they can't really hit each other hard. It's once they get in high school and these older ages, my heart stops for some of these hits. And I've seen some other players injured pretty bad. And so it makes me nervous, but he loves it. And I have such a hard time taking that away from him. So I just pray the whole time. And then if I see a hit too hard, I'm like ready to go out there and hit somebody on the field myself.
I mean, well, the thing is, like with football, it's such a sport. I mean, you can say this about a lot of sports, but you do learn a lot about life. You learn a lot about teamwork,
Yeah.
failure, and success, and there's something to having a goal and working towards the goal. But there is that injury element, and I think that one of the things about football is there's a lot we don't know, especially when it comes to head injuries. There's a lot that we
Hmm.
just simply don't know at this point in time, and we're always learning. And so you try to get them the best equipment, you get them the best recovery. You try to mitigate the contact as much as you can, and then you realize that part of the nature of the game is to actually not go after the ball, but go after the person with the ball. So
Right.
that's what makes
Right.
it a little bit different.
Yes, that's why running back, I'm like, I don't know
Yeah,
if I like that. Everybody's chasing you.
he's got the entire
Um,
team coming after him.
yes, yes. So have you always been pro-life, or is that something that you came to later in life? Or tell me a little bit about that journey.
Well, I think I wouldn't say always. I don't know, but I don't know whether there was a specific point in time where I made a decision to say I was pro life.
Hmm.
Um, for me, growing up, it was kind of a way of life, even though the term pro life wasn't really in vogue as much back then. Um,
Hmm.
we were advocates for life from womb to tomb. I saw my parents serve people and love people, and provide for people spiritual leadership or even material assistance when they could, or just donate their time. I saw them be benevolent with giving of themselves in our community, and so pro-life in the sense that life was valuable. And I think
Right.
that for me, throughout my life, there's been an understanding of the sacredness of human life and the fact that human life is different than the animals. Human life is different than the plants. It's different than anything else we see in creation because we carry the image of our Creator upon us. And so life is sacred. Whether you agree with that life or not, whether that person is an enemy or a friend, there's still something special about human life, and there's some human dignity there. And so that's why you advocate. And so for me, I would say there was a transition as far as being more vocal specifically on the issue of abortion as a human rights issue. And that probably happened probably 6 or 7 years ago when my wife and I purchased an ultrasound at a pregnancy resource center when we were playing for the Baltimore Ravens. And when that happens, I guess, and you're in the NFL, people take note, and that's kind of when I started speaking out probably more about this issue specifically when we kind of enter into that space.
And what was that like? Did you get pushback on that? Because we see people who are in the NFL, a lot of times are kind of told, regardless of what side of the aisle they're on, sometimes they're like, just hush and play football. We don't want to hear your beliefs. It's a game. We don't want to get political, or we don't want to get moral or ethical in this situation. Did you receive pushback? And how did the NFL organization as a whole handle that? Were they supportive of you and your beliefs in that way?
Yeah, the only place the NFL players don't get pushed back usually is in the locker room. We have a great amount of respect for each other, and the thing I loved about playing football is that you're in there with 60 something guys. We're from different backgrounds, different belief systems. A lot of times, I mean, I've had teammates who were praying 3 times a day. They were Muslim. They were praying in a little corner of the locker room. There's different
Hmm.
belief systems, but we respect the fact that we're human beings and we come
Yeah.
together for a certain cause, and we love each other, and we argue and we fight and we get mad at each other, and then we go out and we go play. Most of the pushback, I would say, came from the outside. And so you mentioned it.
Hmm.
A lot of times people, when I speak up about racial injustice in America, one side of the aisle says shut up and play football. When I speak out about the rights of the preborn child, the other side says be quiet, you're a man, it's not nothing for you to talk about. And so I've received pushback from both sides for sure. um, but I've also seen so many people who maybe work in corporate America or certain places where they can't speak about these issues,
Yeah.
and they've messaged me and said, thank you for speaking because I feel like I'll get fired if I say something. Like there are people in our country right now, Christine, who feel like they can't even a post about
Yeah.
something pro life without losing their jobs. And so
Yep.
they are in essence silenced. And so it's imperative that for those of us who do have a voice, like yourself, are able to speak about these things to continue to do so, because in many ways, we are not only speaking for the voiceless, meaning the preborn child or mothers, but we're speaking for the voiceless of people who agree with us and will tell us, but aren't able to say that loudly from the hilltops because they may, lose their jobs or lose their well-being.
Total. It's almost like you had a little bit of a upper hand in the sense that you had a platform. Had you gotten fired for that, it probably, you could have gone all over the news
Yeah.
and fought for your free speech rights. But when you're, just maybe you're a school bus driver, or maybe you work in a regular CEO, or excuse me, office building downtown, you don't really necessarily have the platform that somebody might like you might have, and then you feel like you don't have the means to fight back. And I've seen a lot of people who say that, like, I don't feel like I can share my beliefs, my family will hate me, or I'll lose friends, or this, that, and the other. And to me, I'm like, we need to be able to talk about this issue, even if we disagree. Just because we disagree doesn't mean I don't love you,
Yeah.
and just because we disagree doesn't mean we can't have this conversation. Now, you mentioned a little bit about the locker room, and I'm really curious because to maybe some outsiders, athletes or celebrities as a whole even can have kind of a stereotype, if you will. They enjoy partying, or a lot of times when people get in the league, regardless of what sport it is, maybe it's MLB, maybe it's anything else. And so there have been women involved with the partying and whatnot.
Mhm.
Did you have the opportunity to witness to any of your teammates about the pro-life issue? Maybe they got in a situation where they're like, uh-oh, what do I do now?
Yeah.
Did you have that opportunity to talk to them?
What's crazy is, just like I mentioned, there are people, who I've encountered outside of football who had the same sentiments. There are men inside locker rooms across America, across sports, who feel the same way, who cherish life in the womb, who want to
Yeah.
stand for women and children. Coaches, I've had coaches before
That's
practice come
awesome.
up to me and say, "My wife showed me something that you said. I totally agree with you," and they even feel silent sometimes.
Yeah.
And so there is a sentiment. One of the things I loved about being in locker rooms was talking to guys who were about to have their first child. As I mentioned before, my wife Kirsten and I, we have 7 children, and our oldest is 14 now. But I remember when we had our first, Grace, and I was terrified. Um, I was scared. I was like, I don't know if I could do this. We had been married for 3 years, and I'm the oldest of 6 kids. And so I've seen how parents take care of kids, but it's different when it's your job. Like, it's different when
Yeah.
you go and they give you a child and say, go take care of this kid, and they don't give you any instructions on how to do it.
Right.
And
Am
so
I even qualified for this?
exactly. Like you're like, I'm just a kid myself trying to figure out how to take care of a kid.
Yep.
And so I loved having these conversations with these young men who, some of them, had great dads in their lives. Some of them had a mentor. Some of them didn't have any father figure in their life at all. It ran the gamut. But you would see these guys who really wanted to be good dads and who really wanted to love the mother of their children, even if they weren't married. And having those conversations in the training room, or around the cold tub or the hot tub or at lunch, or even in between periods at practice, was really enriching, because kind of getting back to your point about players, that all factors into this pro-life discussion. So many times we talk about this, the issue of pro-life in a silo as if it's just protecting, which it is, and rescuing preborn children. It is that, but it's also encouraging dads. It's also providing for moms and providing for families. It's also, this cultural conversation about the value of life. And all those things happen when you get 60 something guys together in a locker room who trust each other and are really experiencing a lot of the same things.
Yeah, that's so awesome. I love that you have people who have come up to you and sets up coaches. And I obviously won't ask you any names, but I think that's really, really cool. And something that we don't always hear on our side, but it's almost like, what you're doing is right anyway, but it's almost that extra affirmation of like, we are the majority a lot of times. And a lot of people do believe these things that we believe. And you're right, the pro-life movement, I always say, in order to be pro-life or anti-abortion, whatever you want to call it, the bare minimum that you have to do is be opposed to killing babies. That's the bare minimum. But I know very few people who stay at the bare minimum. Obviously, the majority of people that I know in the pro-life movement are willing to give of their own hard-earned dollars, their time, their effort. They're willing to, take calls 24 hours around the clock from a mom should she need it. I use my social media platform to do baby registries for moms, and we buy them everything that they need. And my followers genuinely get upset when they sell out too fast. And they're like, I didn't get to give on this one. Find another mom. I'm like, okay, all right. If you want to give, I'll find somebody
By the
for
way,
you to give to. It's amazing. I'm like, if you want to give money, then we'll continue to find these women to help support. But that's what I see in the pro-life movement is happening a lot, but it's kind of silenced. We're demonized. Pregnancy resource centers are kind of called fake clinics, or, pro-lifers are called pro-birthers. You've heard all of the talking points. But you have something coming out new. You have a book coming out June 20th. I was hoping it was going to be the 24th because that's the day that Roe was overturned, but that's a Saturday, so it doesn't make any
yeah, I
sense.
know it's that week. It's that week though, so
Yes,
we're
yes.
almost there.
Perfect week.
Yeah.
It's called The New Fight for Life, Roe, Race, and a Pro-Life Commitment to Justice. So tell me your inspiration about the book and kind of what you hope that it will accomplish once people get it in their hands. I can't wait to read it.
Yeah, can you believe in June it'll be 1 year since Roe v. Wade was overturned?
It feels like an eternity and like not at the same time.
Exactly. Probably because we spent so much energy going back and forth and talking about it, and it was emotional. And for me, I don't know about you and those who are listening, but taking yourself back to that point in time where you saw for sure that it was overturned, there was
Hmm.
like emotion. I mean, there
Yeah.
was happiness, there was feeling of relief. And then I think also for a lot of us, it was a what next? Like what now? Like what does this really
Yeah.
mean? And obviously we know that the issue of abortion is now sent back to the states, where states can kind of decide, that people can
Mhm.
decide, which is vitally important. But for many people in the pro-life movement that I've talked to, there's kind of a malaise, or even sometimes even an apathy now. I don't know if you've seen it, but I've seen it a little bit, because they feel like the fight is over and they're
Mm.
wondering what's next. And so the book, The New Fight for Life, is about what's next. And for me, the impetus for writing the book was really kind of stats and stories, basically. I've had an opportunity to speak to many people in the pro-life movement over the last several years, people in academia, people that serve in pregnancy resource centers, people in media, people of faith, talking about this issue of abortion survivors, all these people who many of you you talk to these people on your podcast as well, and hearing their stories about why they chose life, what impacted them, what they like to see for the pro-life movement to make abortion both unthinkable and unnecessary. And then there's one stat that really stuck with me. I work with an organization called Human Coalition, and we provide direct services for pregnant women. We also engage on, policy on the policy side. And we found internally that 76% of abortion determined women, so women that are seeking abortion that reach out to us, would prefer to parent if their circumstances were different. And so when I think about the new fight for life, it's how do we meet the needs of that 76%? Like, how do we meet the needs of the 76% of women who said, you know what, I really don't want to have an abortion. It's either relational with a father, or it's economic, it's housing, it's employment, it's you list the issues that they're facing. And how do we in this next phase of pro-life advocacy really direct attention through services, through policy, through advocacy, through our love and our compassion as a pro-life movement? How do we direct our energies at that 76% and change the outcome of not only the child that they're carrying, but the generations that come after that child?
Yeah, absolutely. Is Human Coalition, are they located in Texas?
Yes, they're in. We're
Okay.
headquartered. We're headquartered in Dallas, but we have telehealth in 18 states, and we have a network of other independent pregnancy resource centers that we work with, but we also have our 7 of our own brick and mortars around the country. But yeah, the headquarters are in Dallas. That's where the call center is for a woman that is seeking an abortion. She's directed to the call center, then we're able to connect her to get resources, and many of those resources may be, government assistance, things
Yeah.
that are needed, like, WIC or SNAP or, financial assistance, those sorts of things.
I know that at Students for Life, we partner with Human Coalition
Yes, we do.
often.
Of course. Yeah.
And
Yeah. Strong partnership.
I, I asked because there was something that was passed, and you said you guys do a little bit of policy stuff too in Texas. I think it was after the heartbeat bill, but it was $100 million toward women and unplanned pregnancies or something along those lines. I don't know exactly. I'd have to go back and read, but I remember seeing something about that, and that Texas was putting their money where their mouth is and then is donating. I don't know if it's directly to pregnancy resource centers or exactly how that money is allocated. Did you guys play a role in that as well?
We did. We did. You may be referring
Awesome.
to, I think, possibly A2A, the Alternatives to Abortion Program.
Okay.
That's one of the provisions. I believe that's one of the provisions in Texas, and I think there are a couple more. But kind of going back to even what you said about, many of the criticisms of the pro-life movement is that are simply pro-birth, and while that may be true for some people, there are a lot who aren't. And kind
Mhm.
of putting your money where your mouth is, and through public and private partnerships is kind of how groups like Human Coalition are funded. And there are several states, Tennessee is one, there are a couple others, who have in their line item in their budget funds to go to pregnancy resource centers or organizations like Human Coalition who are providing these types of services. And again, when we think about the pro-life movement now and this chapter of it moving forward, I think that it's vitally important, even for credibility standards with those who don't agree with us, to show and prove that we care about issues of justice, that we care about meeting people's needs, that we care about long-term flourishing and stability of families after the birth, because we have an opportunity, I think, in this time to really grow the movement, to get
Yeah.
to get wider, where it may sound like that's not happening because we always hear the voices of the loudest advocates and
Sure.
on the right or the left. We always hear those voices, but I think there's a large swath of people in the middle who would gravitate toward a pro-life movement that is both for life, that is for justice, that is for serving women and children.
Sure, sure. So that you mentioned the right or the left. There definitely is that debate there sometimes, and people who agree or disagree. There's also Democrats for life. So not every single Democrat is pro-abortion, and there's some crazy Republicans who are pro-choice or pro-abortion themselves. So. And we won't even talk about libertarians because they're off in their own world. But you you have this constant debate, and I always say that there's these women in the middle of this debate and these families in the middle of this debate who kind of get ping ponged back and forth. And that's where I want to spend my time and my effort in helping those women and helping those families and those babies. But I know that there's different ideas of how to help them. Some people think it should be, communities and churches and those kind of resources. Some people think it should be the government. And you mentioned in your book something that is going to be in there is how to make this not a political debate when it has become such a political hot topic. How do we do that? How do we make it not political? Obviously, don't give your book away.
Yeah,
But touch on that a little bit
that
when
is.
you see one side really pushing it. It's kind of tough.
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. I think Gloria Purvis, who she's an educator, a teacher, she's a podcaster, a writer, an author. Gloria Purvis. She said in an article specifically, and to kind of to your point about women being ping pong back and forth, she talks specifically about black women and abortions and the fact that both sides uses black women as a mascot. And part of what I talk about in the book is the black community and the issue of abortion and how it has been used by the left as the mascot for abortion. These people need abortions because X, Y, Z. And then the right will say, oh, it's so sad that black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to have abortions than the white counterparts. But they usually stop there and don't go to the why. And part of my book kind of talks about the why, because you're right. There are women and children that are caught in the in between, are simply being used by the extremes on both sides as a political football. And that does not serve women at all. So how do we pull it out of the political debate? It's hard because we live in a dichotomy. Our political paradigm in America is extreme left and right. But one way I found to pull it out of the political debate is to listen to women. It doesn't
Mm.
seem revolutionary. It doesn't seem like it's something incredible, but listen. Listen to their stories. Listen to the woman who has a child already, who has part time, possibly full time work, who has housing instability, and understand why she may think that abortion is her only answer. Listen to her. What are the things that she needs? Listen to the woman who um, is strongly pro life. Listen to even the woman who would say, you know what? I want control of my own body because for so long women have not had control of their own body. So I want to have control over something. Just listen to her, maybe not agree. I think when we listen, it sounds crazy. I tell my kids this all the time. When we are able to listen without forming a response, it's amazing how much we learn, how much we see people as individuals and human beings instead of statistics and instead of um, a means to our political ends. And
Yeah.
then also, I think the other thing, quickly is be able to realize that your party does not have everything that it needs to deal with this issue. I don't believe either the Republicans or the Democrats by themselves can handle this issue by themselves. I think both parties have something to bring to the table. And what's difficult and hard for people is to be a bridge. It's hard for us to be a bridge. We want to be on one landmass or the other. None of us wants to be suspended over the river. But in the river is where the life comes. And we need people who are willing, I think, to be those sorts of bridges so that life can flourish underneath them.
That's such great points. You mentioning listening to the women is something that I say because I love working with women. I partner with some pregnancy centers here in Colorado, and that's how I partner with some of these women in unplanned pregnancies and get to have relationships with them. I babysit for them. I do all kinds of stuff. But a lot of times, and this is not to condemn anyone by any means because everybody has their own place. Everybody does their own work within the
Yeah.
pro-life movement a lot of times. But I never want to get away from having that relationship with women because it's hard. Some of the stories, I had an 18-year-old girl who was pregnant with twins. She didn't know who the dad was. Her parents lived in a different state. She
Yeah.
didn't know how she was going to be able to afford a place. She wasn't comfortable with daycare. And how do you even afford daycare in an apartment and go get a job? And you just had twins. You have no idea what to expect. You have no support. Two babies waking up in the middle of the night. I mean, that is a lot. And for some people, it's just like, just choose life. It's the right thing.
Yeah.
But when you're like, okay, but no, there's some real circumstances here that we need to be able to work through. There's like, she's got a lot on her plate right now and she is trying to choose life and she is trying to do the right thing, but we need to be able to come alongside her and support her for however long she needs. And my goal is always to help get women independent because nobody wants to depend on somebody permanently forever. But it's like, how can I support you until we can get you to a place where you feel like you can do this on your own? And if you ever need me in the future, I'm still here. Whether that's, do you need help getting a car? Her car got broken into. She didn't have any clothes to go to work. None of her pre-pregnancy clothes were fitting her and she was only wearing hoodies and leggings to work. Her job told her she couldn't do that anymore. So we took her shopping. We have to be able to, and not everybody can do that. I understand not everybody might not have the finances, but you have a voice or you can volunteer at these places and you can be able to put your time and effort into them. And then you mentioned something so beautiful about the bridging the gap, which I will admit I am 100% convicted in you saying this because a lot of times I very much side with the right because I'm like, we're putting forth the pro-life legislation, but there's no possible way to completely abolish abortion without both sides. You can't do that with 50% of America. I
Yeah.
mean, and genuinely, we have to change our nation as a whole. We have to educate. We have to be able to do things and work together. As much as that might pain me to say in some ways, but we have to because otherwise you're always going to have this side pulling this way and this side pulling this way, and there's never going to be something that we can all meet and support these lives and support these women together. When you see the future of the pro-life movement, what do you see?
I see, and again, part of writing the book is in this new fight for life. I think it's imperative that the pro-life movement become more diverse, and by diverse, I don't just mean ethnicity. That's we can talk about that later. I mean people who are Christians, people who are non-Christians. There are some great atheists for life groups.
Yep.
They believe in the science. their viewpoint is valid. That's how they come to the table. There are people, we already talked about this, that are, on the political left or the political right. There are people who are in churches. We need private organizations to do this, like they are churches, PRCs, other life-affirming organizations. We also need government. It has to be both. I think that the pro-life movement has an opportunity really to hold hands with a lot of different organizations who are working in their own spheres for this single purpose of rescuing children and promoting family stability with mothers and fathers. And so when I think about what's next for the pro-life movement, I also think that this next phase, in some respects, may be more difficult than the prior phase. What do I mean by that? Well, I kind of mean that before, when we had Roe, when we were living life under Roe, there was this banner or this goal that everybody was like shooting for. We got to overturn Roe. Everything we got is to overturn Roe. We could fundraise. We could have rallies. We could do all that because we're fighting against Roe. Again, political, but we're fighting against Roe. Now, it's imperative upon all of us in all of our different states and our different areas of the country to understand that the fight is more localized now. That takes an entire reordering of the brain and the mind to understand that this big behemoth that we're fighting against is now smaller, but equally as important. And oh, by the way, the other side has ratcheted up the intensity, and it's even more difficult now for many people who are speaking out. Now, many people like yourself have an even larger target on their back, or perhaps on their forehead, because of the things that they are saying. And so we have to be vigilant. We have to encourage each other. We have to, like I said before, be diverse and stand together. The Black church, the evangelical church, the Protestants, the Catholics, it's going to take everybody. And within that takes humility. It takes humility sometimes to join hands with people for the same cause, even though they're different. Frederick Douglass once said, I will unite with anyone to do what's right and no one to do what's wrong. It takes a lot of humility to unite with somebody on a right issue, even though you don't agree with everything, with a host of things that they represent. And so there are a lot of challenges, I think. And, in the book, I try to do my best to forecast, to kind of cast a vision for the pro-life movement, for some things that we can do, but also encourage pro-lifers of different walks of life that, the fight isn't over. This is just halftime. I just saw an article recently talking about in states that have enacted 6-week bans, how the abortion numbers have dropped tremendously, which is fantastic. But conversely, in some other states, it's shot through the roof.
Yeah, like
And
mine here in
so,
Colorado.
exactly. So the landscape has changed, but the fight is still important.
The landscape has changed, and we're seeing it. We're seeing pregnancy resource centers here in Colorado completely targeted. They're trying to pass legislation. Actually, they did
Yeah.
just pass legislation that kind of says that they're improperly advertising, especially if they offer the abortion pill reversal, and they're trying to make it a punishable offense if anybody here advertises for or offers the abortion pill reversal, which is just absolutely absurd and completely anti-woman, if you ask me, completely anti-informed choice or informed consent. But the landscape here in Colorado is a little bit dark compared to a state where it's red, and you're like, we're having all these wins, but regardless of what state you're in, there's still going to be women in unplanned pregnancies. Even if you have pro-life laws, there's still going to be these women that we need to reach out to and be able to help and say, hey, I'm here for you, and I will walk alongside you so long as you need me to. I'm going to be a friend to you. I'm going to be a support to you. And maybe I don't have the resources, but if I don't, I will help you find the resources. And I think that's something that everybody can do better on both sides of the aisle, because if you really believe in choice, then you would help a woman who chooses life, right? I mean, logically, I would think. So you bring up a lot of good points, and you're challenging me in a lot that you say.
I'm challenging myself, to be honest with you. I mean, I think the point that you just made about, what hasn't changed since Roe was overturned, and what hasn't changed, as you mentioned, is unplanned pregnancies. What hasn't changed is areas of poverty. What hasn't changed is issues of employment or relationships. Uh, None of that stuff has changed. It didn't change, magically on June 24th, 2022. Those
Hmm.
things are still here. And so we need to still be as vigilant as ever, perhaps more so.
Amen. No, I agree completely. And I think we have a lot of work ahead of us. I think we'll consistently have a lot of work ahead of us. So long as we're a human population and so long as we, push this sexualized culture, hookup culture, and there's unplanned pregnancies or out of wedlock things happening, and I had my own unplanned pregnancy at 20 years old. I'm not condemning anyone. I've been there, I've done that. And that's why I'm passionate about this movement. And I have my son because of it. I chose life. But I think it's so important for us to be there for those women. If one more thing, I have two more questions, but I watched Divided Hearts of America last night. So
Wow.
you're an executive producer. My son and I watched it together,
Wow.
and I wanted to, because I've known who you are. I've heard you speak before, and all of those. But I actually didn't ever had the opportunity to watch that movie, so I watched it, and it was really interesting. You did kind of what you're doing here. You brought both sides of the aisle together, which I really respected. Even if sometimes I was like, "Ooh, just be pro-life,"
Yeah, very
and would
fundamental.
get frustrated. But did you learn anything when you were filming that from the other side, or maybe the people who are pro-abortion, where you're like, okay, well, we can do that better, and that maybe you hadn't thought about before?
Yeah, I learned a lot about myself. And you mentioned some of those interviews where I like you wanted to just pluck people and be like, you're not making any sense. I remember sitting down with Senator Liz Kruger. You probably remember this, and she's the one who, wrote, I guess, part or all of the Reproductive Health Act in New York, which actually was the impetus for me doing the documentary. And that act or that law made New York at the time, I think before Illinois decided to one up them, the most abortion friendly state in the union. And sitting with her, and I said to her, where can we meet? And she said, well, I think that once a child is born, I think we all will want that child to flourish. In some respects, she said that. And I think so many times I can catch myself as a pro lifer, demonizing the other side. And that's not to say that some people shouldn't be reprimanded, critiqued, all those sorts of things. We critique behavior, and we critique attitudes that disrupt human flourishing, that harm people. That's what we're called to do. Sometimes we want to get personal, and that's where we have to be able to have some sort of temperance and draw back, because there are some people on the other side who actually think they're doing the best thing for women given the circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
That's hard to realize. That's hard to embrace. That's not a popular pro-life point that I'm saying. But there are some people who really think that given the landscape and given the circumstances of humankind right now, providing a woman an option to have an abortion is the best thing, even though we don't agree. But I think that we can all come together on trying to help people once they're born. And so, I also learned through the whole thing about empathy. And, you mentioned it in your conversations and your relationships. I think so often we get, in our own silo, so to speak, or our own social media, or be around people who just think like us. And we forget that there's humanity on the other side. These people are human beings, and there's women and children that are humans that are dealing with tough things. And the documentary helped me to kind of reinforce that idea. But also, one last thing I got from the documentary that I knew but was reinforced is that there are so many people in the pro-life movement who are in all factors and phases of life. They are in academia. There are people who are pro-life that are in athletics. There are pro-lifers that are in areas of faith, politics, human services, people who are moms and people who are dads, people who are students
Mm-hmm.
in college campuses, young people. The pro-life movement spans across all those, areas of division, age, gender, ethnicity. We have to find a way to continue to come together and to elevate and advocate for each other and join hands, because we are much larger than people think. I mean, part of this new fight for life, and I talk about it, is just that there are more of us than we think, although we may not have the loudest voices. So be not weary in doing well. At the point in time, you'll reap a harvest if you do not give up. That's that verses in Galatians. But I think it applies to some of the work that we're doing right now to keep on going.
You bring up, you actually kind of segued into my next question here, because not everybody feels that they have a voice to talk about this. You know, you're vocal about it. I'm vocal about it. There are people who are very bold about it, but there's a lot of people who feel silenced or maybe even uncomfortable because they don't know how to talk about it, or they're a little bit nervous. If you could give one piece of advice to those people listening who are a little bit nervous to speak up on this issue, what piece of advice would that be?
Well, the piece of advice I was going to give, but I gave before, what was listening. But I think that the one piece of advice I would give to that person um, would be to have courage. Courage is not easy. It may cost you something. So often we want to advocate or we want to stand for issues that don't cost us anything, but that are popular. And just like anything else we've seen in human history, in our history, or in your personal history, or even in sports, we started this conversation talking about sports and talking about football. It costs something to play a sport. It
Yeah.
costs your time. It might cost your body because you have a certain goal and something that you want to achieve. This is no different. A degree costs you something. It costs you staying up late and studying. Your job, whatever it is, your occupation, it costs you something. You have to commit to it. And I don't think that sometimes we understand that even something like being pro-life will cost us something. And we have to be willing, I think, at times to count that cost. Now, I'll also say this. So the one piece of advice I have to answer your question is to have courage and to count the cost. But also, I think within that, it's understanding that not everybody has to be vocal. Not everybody has to speak. In the NFL, over the last several years, you've seen a lot of players talk about social justice and talk about, racism in America. And I've talked to a lot of those players, and I've spoken about those issues for a very long time throughout my career. But sometimes when I'm asked to speak to those players, I say, what advice do you give to a player who really wants to get involved and stand up and talk about these things? And I'll say to them, you know what? Everybody doesn't have to talk. Don't feel pressure that you have to be a speaker on something that you know not of,
Yeah.
or that that's just not your lane. We need you to be valuable in where God has gifted you. And so when it comes to this issue about speaking out, if you're someone who really wants to speak out and can do so, do it by all means. But also understand that it still takes courage not to speak out, but to speak in smaller groups, or to use your resources, or to push your senator or your congressperson to pass legislation, or to realize that you run a business and you have moms who might be pregnant and they need to work from home sometimes, to say, you know what, it's going to cost me something not to have you in the office, but we learned from the pandemic that we can also do things remotely. And so we're going to change your schedule up because I value the child in your womb and I value you as an employee. And I think that you can still do your job and still care for your kids. I'm going to reorder how we do our work week. Things like that still take courage, even though they are not the usual advocacy and shouting from the rooftops that we're used to seeing.
Yeah, there's absolutely unconventional ways that we can be fighting for life, or supporting the movement as a whole, or just supporting humanity and families, and being able to, like you said, with careers. Yeah, it might cost you something when somebody has a baby, and that's why you see a lot of companies like Amazon who are willing to pay for abortions. But what about the woman who chooses life? How are we going to invest in her? How are we going to help her? So you bring up so many fabulous points, ones that absolutely challenge me. Thank you so much for joining us today. It has been an absolute pleasure.
It's been an honor. Thank you so much for the work you do, and it's great to join. Hope to do it again.